Hello again, everybody. This is Mr. Everything, and I am coming back at you with another Wargaming and miniature video. Now, in today's video, we're going to continue on with our Battlegroup boot camp. And in today's video, we're going to be talking about aircraft. Bombing, rockets, machine guns, cannons. Alright, throughout the war, most air forces provided the ground troops with some form of close air support, as well as aircraft and other roles. The aircraft in the Army lists represent those most commonly used in a ground combat support role. As fast reconnaissance units, aerial artillery observers, or fighters, fighter bombers, or bombers in a ground attack role. It doesn't really go into like carpet bombing or strategic bombing of factories. That's not what this game. That isn't what this game is trying to represent. This is representing a battlefield scenario where incoming aircraft would come in and strafe the enemy or drop bombs or use rockets, but not like bombing factories behind the enemy lines or, cities. That's not what these rules are about. Okay, so some aircraft are available to commanders to include in his battle group. So just go ahead and look at your Army list, look at the air support section, and check out to see if there was any aircraft that you want to include in your Army list. Aerial reconnaissance aircraft can sometimes be purchased as reconnaissance support, and air artillery observers can be purchased as artillery. Okay, so most ground attack aircraft are not available. Their deployment is controlled by higher commanders above the battle group, and as such are beyond the rank to command. That is not to say they will not be available to aid you. The arrival of ground attack aircraft is a random event. If, during the course of the game, a commander draws an air attack chit for his battle rating, battle counters, then there is a chance for aircraft to arrive. Place the battle counter on the commander's table edge. So I would just mount it. I just place it on my table edge. And at the start of my next turn, before rolling any orders, you roll a single D6, and on a 5 or better, the aircraft has arrived. Next, roll on the battle group's close air support table. So every battle group has a close air support table. Like if you pick infantry or armor or the 21st Panzer, or if you take the 82nd Airborne or the British 6th Airborne or whatever, each one of those battle group Army lists has an aircraft table. You will place the model aircraft on a flying stand on the commander's table edge, ready to be given an order. Okay, so I got out all the planes that I have currently available. I've got a P-51 Mustang. I've got the Thunderbolt, the P-47. I've got the Spitfire. This one says it's a 2 Alpha. I've got the 109. I'm sorry, there's a 109. This is a 190. The 190 shows that it's an A model, but I'm just trying to represent the various. I'm not going to get every single model. I mean, you could, but I'm just not. I found that the 190 is hard to come by in 15 millimeter. I see that there's a lot of companies out there that make 144 scale, 1 to 144 scale, which is slightly smaller than these, and that scale is slightly smaller. It's almost half this size, to be honest. It looks very small. My P-47 and 144 scale is, the wingspan is only as wide as maybe those invasion stripes. So it's a much smaller aircraft. It's probably about this long. And these are actual 15 millimeter scale, because I'm playing Battlegroup in 15 millimeter. But if you're playing in 12 millimeter, use the 144 scale. If you're playing in 1/72 or 20 millimeter, you're going to be able to find every plane available in that scale. 15 millimeter is just a little bit more tricky. These 4 planes here are all die-cast models, and this one's actually a plastic model. Now you can mount them on their own flying stands, or make your own, or what have you. I know some people use radio antennas with multiple sections so you can have different altitudes, but this game doesn't require that. I could see the plane being mounted a little bit higher, maybe 6 inches off the ground instead of this 2 or 3 inches that this is, just to give it more of a, more of a aerial look, I guess, as a height advantage. But again, this game doesn't really require you to do that. These die-cast models here, these 3, all came from a company that have these small little bases like this, and because they're die-cast, there is a really strong chance that they will fall over. So what I did was I attached them to a much larger base, plus it'll protect the die-cast model itself, so that, like this model here is an extremely heavy model, but with this base, now it's not going to tip over or fall over. So, but this model here is a plastic model, so I just attached it using a magnet to a base, a flight stand. And this is a totally different, this is an Italeri model, and it came with a fairly good sized flight stand. I probably don't need to make one of these, but I think I will, just to make it universal. But you can have them mounted any way you want, and just make your own flight stand if you want. What I'm envisioning is this Jeep is actually an air observer in this scenario. Okay, so once you draw your chit, right? You draw your chit, you place it on your side of the table. At the start of your turn, you roll a die. If you get a 5 or better, then you receive support from an aircraft. You roll to see which aircraft it is. In the Americans table, it shows a Mustang or a P-47. Let's just say that you rolled for a P-47. You put it on the edge of your table, and now it's ready to receive orders. Okay, so now, and then you can just put this as part of your battle ratings. Okay, and then you roll your orders, and you would have to issue an order just like any other unit on the table. Okay, so let's talk about forward air controllers, like this guy. If a battle group contains a forward air controller, that's if, and he is on the table and unpinned, then the chance of the aircraft arriving improves. Instead of rolling a 5 or better, the die roll required is 3 or better. This is the air controller's main role, guiding the pilot to where the action is, and thus increasing the chance of air support arriving. I can see where certain players would not include an air controller, because that's points that you have to spend, and the chance of you getting an air attack chit is about a 5% chance. I mean, there's about 100 chits in there, and there's probably about 5 of these, so you're looking about a 5% approximately. And if you might be spending points on an air controller that you never get a chance to use. But if you do get to use it, if you do get an air attack, then instead of a 5 or better, you increase it significantly to a 3 or better. Okay, orders and aircraft. An aircraft can be given an order or not, just like any other unit. The only order an aircraft can be issued is the maneuver and fire order. So an aircraft must first move to anywhere on the table and can then open fire. Aircraft do not have inches of movement. They don't have like 10 inches or infantry like 5 inches or whatever. They have infinite movement. So you just move them anywhere on the table and then they open fire. Aircraft are fast enough to be able to move anywhere on the table. Simply place it somewhere approximately 10 inches is fine from their target. The exact location is not important because the aircraft is always on the move anyway. Okay, this is just to simulate the attack. So you would just pick up the plane, you would place it on the table, just wherever. They recommend 10 inches, but like this right here is a 6 inches. It doesn't matter. Just put it where it fits. Because there might be a lot of terrain like bocage or hedges or stuff like that. So just set it. If it's a little more than 10 inches, no big deal. Now, once in position, an aircraft can open fire. All aircraft firing is resolved at the 20 to 30 inch range. Okay, so it's implied that the aircraft is up firing and it's doing it at 20 inches. Okay, 20 to 30 inches. That's where the pilot decides to open up. The usual modifiers applied to aircraft firing. It can fire using any of its weapons as follows. Okay, so the weapons it has available is usually machine guns, autocannons, rockets, and bombs. Machine guns fire suppressing fire with small arms or aimed fire with small arms. So basically, the aircraft can either suppress or aim just like ground troops. Autocannons. They do suppressing or aimed fire the same with small arms, but they can also do aimed fire with armor-piercing shells if you have like a tank. Rockets, they do suppressing fire with high explosive and aimed fire with high explosive. So again, the pilot can choose to, pretty much with all of these weapons, choose to do either suppressing fire or aimed fire. And finally, bombs. Bombs are fired the same way as you do indirect fire. All right, so it's kind of like bombs are artillery just carried by a plane. Okay, so let's take a look at machine guns. Most aircraft armed with machine guns, each aircraft-mounted machine gun has a rate of fire of 3. So you would think, in this case, with the P-47 having 8 machine guns, 8 times 3, you'd have this crazy high rate of fire. Well, that's not true. An aircraft with 3 machine guns has a rate of fire of 9, but if you have 4 or more machine guns, they call that multiple machine guns, you have a rate of fire of 10. So you never have more than a rate of fire of 10. Although armed with lots of machine guns, they don't carry much ammunition. An aircraft can only fire its machine guns 3 times per game. So you'll need to keep track of how many times it's fired until you run out of ammunition. Autocannons. Many aircraft are armed with autocannons. These are fired exactly like other vehicle-mounted autocannons. An autocannon mounted on an aircraft has the additional advantage of the aircraft's speed, meaning that the rounds travel at a higher velocity than ground-mounted weapons, giving them a +2 to their penetration value. and they always attack the target's rear armor. Technically it's the top armor, but they use the rear armor value. And also, autocannons have 3 shots per game. So you got to keep track of that ammunition separately. Now, this guy doesn't have autocannon, so I wouldn't have to measure, keep track of that. But I think the 190 has an autocannon. Maybe the 109 as well. 109 has a 30 millimeter cannon, and the 190 has 2 20 millimeter cannons. So yes. Okay, rockets. Okay, aircraft like the IL-2, the Typhoon, the P-47 were armed with ground attack rockets. All rockets must be fired in pairs, but multiple pairs can be fired at the same attack. So, like this P-47 potentially could have 8 rockets. So if it has 8 rockets, you could fire 2, 4, 6, or 8. If you fire 2, you just keep track of it, because then he'll still have rockets for an additional attack later. So they're fired in pairs. Rockets are highly inaccurate and always hit on a 6, regardless of range and modifiers. Well, it doesn't matter. We already know the range is 20 to 30, but don't use any modifiers. Just roll the dice, 1 per rocket, and if you roll a 6, you hit. Now, a rocket, if you fired all 8, you'd be rolling 8 dice, right? Okay. Regardless of range and modifiers, a rocket has an armor penetration value, as for guns, and always attack the vehicle's rear, which is actually the top. They also have an HE rating for suppressive fire. So if you wanted to shoot that at infantry and try to suppress them, you could do that as well. Now, let's take a look at rockets. Rockets have a 4-4, like a medium mortar. Now, I'm looking specifically at a 5-inch rocket. Yeah, 4-4 as if it was a mortar. And it also has a penetration of 6. So it hits the top armor and it uses penetration of 6. Now, each type of rocket from each different nationality might have different values. Now, these are the ones I took out of the 1944 American P-47 potential loadout. Okay, now bombs. Bombs are a little trickier, right? Bombs come in 3 general sizes: small, medium, and large. But even a small bomb is still a rather large explosion. Each bomb has a penetration value and an HE rating just like an artillery shell. Bombs are dropped using the indirect artillery fire rules. Instead of an artillery spotter placing the target marker, a forward air observer must do it. So like he would be my forward air controller. He's basically a artillery spotter for the aircraft. He must use the request artillery fire order, and then instead of fire for effect, given the aircraft maneuver and fire order, if the target point is not within the line of sight of the forward air observer, or one is not present, like maybe you decided not to spend the points on him, then the aircraft crew must spot for themselves. So the pilot has to look down and see what he's shooting at. In this case, roll for artillery accuracy as normal, but add an extra D6 to the deviation distance. So what they're trying to say there is a pilot is, if he has to spot on his own, there's a good chance that he's going to drop it in the wrong place. So if you roll accurate, which is normally only 1 die 6, but because the pilot had to spot himself, it becomes 2 die 6. And if you rolled inaccurate, right, and it was a 4 die 6, you'd be throwing 1 more die 6, and he would be off by 5 die 6. Okay, so just theoretically, let's just say I rolled really bad and I rolled something like 25 inches. Remember that if your spotter round is not in the right area, you get to decide not to fire it, right, on your artillery. Because normally in artillery, you call for fire, you check communications, you place a spotter round, you roll to see how accurate it is, you move the spotter round to a spot where it's actually going to land, and then at that point you fire for effect. You call for fire. If you don't call for fire, then it doesn't. You don't fire. So at that point, the pilot knows he's way off target and decides not to drop, right? So that's mainly because maybe his flying skill, his turning, or he didn't line up properly, so he decides not to drop the bomb. That's up to the player. But if you only roll, like, let's say you get a normal deviation with the one extra, and you roll like a 10-inch, you might say, okay, I'm going to drop it anyway. Okay, other bombs. These are dropped using the same rules as above, but have different effects when they hit the ground. There is cluster bombs. Cluster bombs drop small anti-personnel bomblets. So basically a cluster bomb is like full of hand grenades. Basic. Highly effective against infantry. They lack the explosive power to destroy many armored vehicles. A cluster bomb has an HE rating of 10/5+, but count as heavy HE when rolling for pinning. They have an armor penetration value of 2, and they attack the vehicle's top or rear armor. So a cluster bomb has 10 chances. I mean, if it gets a hit, it could cause a lot of casualties. 10 dice, but you're looking for 5s or better. Okay, PTAB. PTAB bombs were an early Russian attempt to develop a cluster bomb. Each was 2.5 kilograms, hollow-nosed bomblet, and 192 would be carried by a Sturmovik ground attack aircraft. Dropped from 200 meters, they scattered over a wide area. A PTAB bomb has an HE effect of 6/5, but counts as medium HE when rolling for pinning. They have a penetration value of 6 when rolling for armor penetration, and always attack the vehicle's rear or top armor. It has a penetration value of 6 because basically these, because they're hollow tips, making them kind of like a shape charge, like a heat round. Dive bombers, like the Stuka or the PE-2, they were known as dive bombers, attacking from a steep dive. This type of attack meant that the bombs would be more accurate than on the conventional level bombing. When dropping bombs, a dive bomber may re-roll one of its artillery accuracy dice. The player may choose which dice to re-roll, but must abide by the second results. So if you're at normal, you get 2 dice, plus the 1 for the pilot doing it himself, and you roll a 6 and a 2 and a 3, you can take that 6 and re-roll it to make it less inaccurate. Also, remember, I'm only adding this extra die because I don't have a forward air controller. If I had a forward air controller, it would still be the 2 dice, and then I could re-roll 1. That's a dive bomber. Aerial observation aircraft. Some aircraft were used as spotter planes for artillery observers. These aircraft can use the request artillery fire order as well as moving, so the aircraft can make a normal move, which is basically anywhere on the table, and still spot for artillery in the same order. So if you need to get behind something that blocks line of sight or something like that, the plane can do that. And they use the same indirect fire sequence as ground-based observers. Okay, aircraft and battle rating. Okay, being under the attack has a demoralizing effect on ground troops. And because of this, the first time any unit in a battle group comes under any form of aircraft attack, regardless of the results of the attack, the battle group must take a battle counter. So it's basically, oh my gosh, they've got arrows, they got planes in the air, we're taking a battle counter. Whether the result of the attack is good or bad, it doesn't matter. But conversely, shooting down an aircraft is a big morale boost and a very obvious victory. If an aircraft is destroyed, then 2 battle counters must be taken instead of the 1 for the destroyed unit. Yeah, so it's a great boon to get an aircraft on the table because you get this highly maneuverable weapons platform that goes anywhere you want, pretty much. But and you cause a battle rating just for shooting a machine gun at anybody. But if they're able to shoot you down, you're going to lose 2 battle ratings. Which, if you think about it, it's really not that big of a loss. Because the first chit you drew should have been a penalty. But instead, it was a positive. So all it basically does is it brings your accounting back to normal. So it basically turns that air attack counter that you used into another counter, plus the one for shooting a unit down. Alright, in this video, this is going to be a 2-part video. We're going to actually talk about shooting aircraft down as part of anti-aircraft fire. So this is aircraft and anti-aircraft. Alright, anti-aircraft fire. With air attack a constant threat, a battle group will need its own anti-aircraft defenses. Anti-aircraft fire is always resolved as suppressing fire, as the sky is literally filled with lead in front of an aircraft, and always resolved at the weapon's maximum range, regardless of where the actual aircraft model actually is. Remember, it is in constant motion and it's moving in and out. And because fast-moving and evading aircraft are notoriously hard to hit, only anti-aircraft weapons, infantry small arms, machine guns, and pintle-mounted vehicle machine guns can fire at aircraft. Okay, suppressing fire. Aircraft are attacked using the standard suppressing fire rules. Simply roll a d6 and see if the aircraft is pinned. This isn't actually pinned, as for ground troops. Instead, the aircraft takes evasive action to avoid the flak and climbs well out of harm's way. Anti-aircraft weapons. As all anti-aircraft fire is suppressing fire, those that have the chance of using it are listed in the suppressing fire table. This is basically small arms and machine guns with the rate of fire of 5 or more, and some very light HE for autocannons. Rate of fire does not include tank machine guns, as these would not have the elevation, and so cannot be used for anti-aircraft fire. Non-autocannon HE rounds from other units, anti-tank guns, tank main guns, etc., cannot be used against aircraft. So basically it's man-portable machine guns, pintle-mounted machine guns, and small arms, and some light autocannons. Multiple machine gun mounts, like maybe on the M16. Some anti-aircraft weapons with multiple mounts increase their firepower and damage. A multiple-mounted machine gun has 2 or more barrels, and its rate of fire is increased to 10, and can always roll twice against a target for suppressing fire for each attempt to pin. Okay, so like an M16 has 4 50 cals, it still would only have a rate of fire of 10, but it's only suppressing, so you roll 2 dice. Multiple autocannon mounts, like the Whirlwind. The most powerful anti-aircraft weapons are multiple mounted autocannons. These weapons have 2 or more barrels and have their rate of fire increased to 10, and can also roll twice against a target for suppressing fire, counting as very light HE for both attempts to pin. Damage to aircraft. If an aircraft is pinned by suppressing fire, then it does not roll a cover save. There's no cover in the sky. Instead, roll another d6. On a 4 or better, the aircraft is also damaged and takes 1 hit, in addition to being marked as pinned. If the damage is caused by multiple mounted weapon, then the aircraft takes 2 hits instead of 1. Well, that's pretty good, because let's say we've got multiple machine guns, right? I'm only getting the opportunity to roll twice to pin, but if I successfully pin, then I get a chance to roll to damage them, and if I do, I actually did 2 damage. Aircraft and unit morale. Okay, now I'm just going to use the 190 and the 109 as an example. They both have 3 hit points. The P-47 has 4 hit points. So it's not a whole lot of hit points. But then again, you're not doing a whole lot of damage. You're mostly just pinning them. Aircraft and unit morale. An aircraft that takes any damage must make a morale test, just as any other vehicle that was hit but not destroyed. Or infantry that took casualties, right? So you all have to take a morale check. Yeah, the aircraft morale has their own table. It's a 1 is return to base, where a 2 through 6 is okay. And remember, a 6 is a potential for Call of Duty test. If an aircraft is reduced to 0 hits, then it is shot down. And you must take 2 battle counters. We talked about that earlier in this video. Okay, so that is aircraft. Now, this is a little anecdote that I want to share with you guys, in that if you have the potential for aircraft, which you will in every battle, because the air attack chit is in the battle rating chits that you have to draw, so there's always a potential for aircraft, right? Okay, so you will need to have the required aircraft for your game, but you also need to note what weapons are available for those aircraft and the aircraft's capabilities. I would recommend creating or writing down on your army list all the pertinent information. And I've done something similar to that using this. I created my own air tables here, and the die rolls you would need to get which aircraft and what weapon systems are on those aircraft and their hits, so I don't have to constantly look in the rule book. And then I also have a note here that weapons ranges are 20 to 30 inches and what their penetration is. So the 20 and the 30 millimeter cannons, I increased their penetrations by 2 because they're shot from an aircraft, and the machine guns and the rockets and the bombs. All that information would be good to have at your fingertips. Your rule book, you'll constantly be looking in your rule book, because it's probably an afterthought. Like you deploy your battle group, you move across the battle, and then all of a sudden you draw a battle counter that says air attack, and you're like, oh, okay, now I got to look up all those rules. I recommend doing that ahead of time. In the next video, we're going to be going into the last chapter of the basic rules, which is called Battlefield Engineering. And then after that, we'll be touching on some of the advanced rules in the rulebook And then venturing from there, we might go into some of the different campaign books. But I'll see you in Battlefield Engineering.